How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Dragon's Den, and today I got another video for you, another deck tech, and this one's going to be a little bit different. If you haven't noticed that by now, normally I have a way I like to lay out my videos, starting with the ramp, and then sort of getting to things and hitting them by category and everything, and that's just not going to be how things work out this time, because this video came about in a little bit of a different way. So, this past weekend, I was playing Commander with my friends, and I pitched a deck idea, and I saw everybody in my play group just sort of light up because they thought this was an extremely fun deck to build. Normally, I build up towards the higher end of the power level for casual tables, and this is not going to be that. This is going to be a more fun, truly casual deck at probably around a 5, if I had to guess, a 5 or a 6. And it's literally a deck just built to be fun, you know? So, this wasn't originally the video that I had planned. I had a different deck in mind and everything else, and between the excitement that I had for this deck and the excitement that my friends had for this deck and everything else, it made me decide that this is what I would cover next. So as we're going through the images and talking about the deck and everything else, it's not going to be laid out as precisely as my other videos have been, but I promise you it's worth it. So we're covering Omnath, Locus of Mana. Omnath, Locus of Mana is a 3-drop green commander, and it's a 1/1, and it says you don't lose unspent green mana as steps and phases end. So normally, if you have excess floating mana and you pass to the next phase of your turn, then you lose that mana and it just goes to waste. Whereas Omnath says if that mana is green, you keep it. So it basically allows you to bank your green mana over turns. And then it says Omnath, Locus of Mana gets +1/+1 for each unspent green mana you have. So if you have 5 floating green mana, Omnath is a 6/6 instead of a 1/1. So it pumps itself for all the green mana that you bank. And there's plenty of ways you can do this. You can use it to just save up your mana and cast big stompy creatures. A lot of people like to go Voltron with this and everything else. And you just throw a bunch of equipment on it, give Omnath trample somehow, produce as much mana as you can, and then just start swinging at people to win the game. And while there's a little bit of that in here, because it needed some more consistency than if I didn't put any of that in this deck and I only had the 1 win condition in it, that we'll get to in just a little bit, it honestly would probably be weaker than precons. So I had to throw a few things in to balance it out just a little bit. So let's get into it, because this is not Omnath Voltron. This is not Omnath Big Mana. This is Omnath Turbo Fog. So, first we have Elixir of Immortality. The vast majority of the cards in this deck are instants. They're things you're going to be spending a lot of. So being able to shuffle all your resources back into your deck is extremely good. I love Elixir of Immortality as a card because it's cheap and it can really just sort of keep you in the game if you're a deck that draws a bunch of cards or, you know, spends a lot of resources and things like that. Colossal Majesty enchantment lets you draw a card at your upkeep if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, and you will. Helix Pinnacle is the win condition that I was talking about. So what you want to do with this is you want to fog, and you just want to protect yourself, protect your life total, and everything else until you can win with Helix Pinnacle. That is the deck that was pitched and what everybody got so excited about. So Helix Pinnacle is a 1 mana green enchantment with Shroud, so it can't be targeted by any spells or abilities from anybody. And it has an X ability. For a singular X, put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, you win the game. So, this is a fun card, especially in this deck. And for me, especially at a casual table, this is the way that I want to win with this deck. While there are some other ways to win in here, because there needs to be, like I said, if Helix Pinnacle was the only win condition in the deck, this would be a very, very, very low power deck, like lower than a 5 or 6, which is where I think my deck list sits at. So, you know, Helix Pinnacle is the funnest and my favorite way to win in this deck, but it's not the only way. And you got to draw into it. And so there's the things like you can't tutor this up in mono green, at least not that I know of. But it's a fun card, and it's the main win condition in the deck. Next we have Horn of Greed, letting you draw cards when you play lands. Staff of Domination. This deck can go infinite. It was sort of coincidental. And I say coincidental as in I saw there was ways that I had a couple of creatures in here that could tap for an absolutely absurd amount of mana. So I put Staff of Domination in the deck because Staff of Domination enables the combo with those creatures. So if you get a creature that at any point can tap for 5 or more mana, you go infinite with Staff of Domination. And I believe, off the top of my head, there's 2 creatures in here that can do this. So what you ideally want to do is if you can make 5 or more mana, you would tap that creature to make the 5 mana, spend 3 of it, and tap Staff of Domination to untap that creature, and then pay 1 mana into the first ability to untap Staff of Domination, netting you 1 mana. So this makes infinite mana, and then once you have infinite mana, you actually, with Staff of Domination out, have infinite life gain, infinite tap all your opponent's creatures down infinitely, and you can draw your entire deck. So, infinite tap down, infinite life gain, infinite mana, infinite card draw, all off of this one card if you have a creature that can tap for 5 or more. Next we have Whisper Silk Cloak. It's an equipment that gives Omnath, Shroud, and Unblockable. This is, like I said, I had to put a few things in here that allowed Omnath to get in there for combat damage to win that way. So Whisper Silk Cloak is one of those ways. It just being straight up unblockable means you don't worry about anything, and with it having Shroud, it protects it from single target removal. Brotherhood Regalia. So it gives it Ward 2. It's an equipment that gives equipped creature Ward 2. It makes it an assassin in addition to its other types, and it can't be blocked. So it's unblockable without the unblockable keyword. And then equip legendary creature 1. So it'll only cost 1 to equip a Omnath. Again, makes it unblockable, lets you defeat somebody with commander damage. Next we have Swiftfoot Boots, it's another piece of protection, giving it haste, and more importantly, giving it hexproof. And then we have Season of Gathering, which I thought there was another equipment next. Like I said, these are sort of going to be random because I was getting these images and everything else, talking with my friends and all that. So it's not exactly laid out. So something I wanted to touch on with the equipment, especially with things that give Shroud or hexproof, is they're important because this deck completely revolves around you playing your commander and your commander sticking on the board. If they kill Omnath, then you lose all of your unspent green mana that you've banked, and then you have to start up again from scratch. So keeping Omnath on the board is 100% necessary. And that's why this, I would say it's honestly a 5 on the power level, is because it is so important for Omnath to stay on the board. If Omnath can't stay on the board, you can't win with this deck. Period. It is 100% commander reliant. So it's still weak to board wipes, and it has better matchups than others. This deck is going to be pretty weak against combo, but any decks that want to win through the combat step, you have a 1,000,000% advantage over those decks. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover there, is you need the single target removal protection, and even then board wipes are still going to hurt. So next we have Season of Gathering. Season of Gathering is honestly a card that I think should absolutely be a green staple, and I can't say that enough, as I have one of these. I got it from the Bloomburrow pre-release, and I've got it in one of my decks, and anytime I draw it and I play it, it becomes an absolute game changer. It's a newer card, so I don't like to just skip over it like I do some of these others. So it's a 6-mana sorcery. Choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes. You may choose the same mode more than once. So for the price of 1 paw print, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. It gains vigilance and trample until end of turn. So in this particular case, you spend 1 paw print, put a 1/1 counter on Omnath, and you give him trample and vigilance, vigilance is important, but trample is the big important thing there that'll allow you to take somebody out if you need to. For 2 paw prints of price, choose artifact or enchantment, destroy all permanents of the chosen type. And for 3 paw prints, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So you can use this to wipe artifacts, enchantments, both. Pump your creatures, give them vigilance and trample, draw cards. It's really, really versatile, and everything it does is really good. Heroic Intervention, it's just a protection spell, giving Omnath hexproof and indestructible. That is the biggest thing. I mean, it protects all of your stuff, but protecting Omnath is the biggest reason that this is in here. Bassless Collar, giving Omnath Death Touch and Lifelink, so that even if you don't have some of your things that give trample, or you're really trying to fog and everything else, this can be something that kind of protects you from aristocrats, not outside of infinite combos. Like, if somebody has an infinite combo with a Blood Artist out or something, like, you're going to lose to that. But this will allow you that if somebody's just sitting there sacking things for value and they're whittling people down over time and everything else, you can throw this on Omnath and you can freely swing Omnath around, and he's going to be so big you'll just gain a ton of life, and it'll help pad your life total so that you live longer than the other people at the table in that situation. Next we have Shadow Spear. It's sort of in here for the same reason. I wanted it for the lifelink, but the fact that it gives trample as well also means that this can be a game ender when it's put on Omnath. And you can pay 1 and you can make your permanents, your opponent's permanents, lose hexproof and indestructible, which can be really, really good, especially if your opponents tend to play a lot of things that have hexproof or indestructible. Like, I know my particular play group, I see a lot of the Theros gods, so having Shadow Spear around is really, really good for trying to get rid of those. Next we have Sword of Feast and Famine. This is another thing that it can allow Omnath to get through with unblocked damage if your opponents are playing only green or black creatures. Giving Omnath +2/+2 and protection from those colors. And honestly, protecting Omnath from black cuts out a lot of single target removal. And the protection from green isn't bad either, because it does protect it from a few things. And then if it deals combat damage, you're going to untap all of your lands, and whoever you hit is going to discard a card, assuming they survive the attack. But untapping all of your lands is part of the most important part here, because you'll float all your mana, hit somebody with Sword of Feast and Famine, untap all your lands, and then float all your mana again, essentially allowing you to use your lands twice a turn to float mana to make Omnath even bigger and bank more mana over time. Soul Ring, because obviously Soul Ring. 3 visits, 2 mana ramp piece that goes and gets you a land. Nature's Lore goes and gets you a land, 2 mana ramp piece. Rampant Growth, 2 mana, go get a land ramp piece. Oracle of Moldiah, we have extra land drop stuff in here, so Oracle Moldiah, play with the top card of your library revealed. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, and you can play lands from the top of your library. Wayward Swordtooth, it has Ascend, so you'll get the City's Blessing if you have 10 or more permanents. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, but it can't attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing. Isua Lost but Seeking, 3 mana creature, you get 2 additional land drops on each of your turns. Exploration, 1 mana enchantment, you get an extra land drop on each of your turns. Emerald Medallion, 2 mana artifact. Green spells cost you 1 less to cast, so it's mana reduction. It's another piece of 2 mana ramp that's going to reduce the price of every single spell in this deck. Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. This is one of the cards that can go infinite with Staff of Domination. So it's a 3 mana 2/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. So if a creature enters and it has the highest power and toughness on the board, they can draw a card. But Omnath is going to be huge because you're going to be banking a ton of green mana, so nobody is ever going to be able to draw a card off of this other than you, because you're always going to have the biggest creature all the time. So you can pay 1 green and tap it. Add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So, because you're banking mana and Omnath is absolutely huge. You pay 1 green and tap this, and you're going to make as much mana. You're basically going to double the amount of mana that you have. Because Omnath is a 1/1, so say you had 10 mana, right? So Omnath is an 11/11 in that situation. You pay 1 mana, making Omnath a 10/10, and tapping this, and you're making 10 mana. So you're essentially doubling your mana with Selvala. That's good on its own, but if you have Staff of Domination out, and Omnath has at least, 4 counters on, or you have at least 4 floating mana when you activate Selvala, you go infinite. So Selvala's in here simply for that reason. Virtue of Strength, these are in here. So for 1 mana, you can return target creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. There's situations where that can be useful, but the biggest reason it's in here is for the Virtue of Strength part of this, not the adventure part. 7 mana enchantment. If you tap a basic land for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So all of your basics are going to tap for 3 mana with this out, which is going to help you bank even more, help you grow faster. Overprotect is a way to... It has a dual purpose. So it's an instant from Bloomburrow that says target creature you control gets +3/+3 and gains trample and hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So you can either use this as a finisher to give Omnath trample, to hit somebody and take them out of the game, or you can use this to protect Omnath from removal or board wipes. Bighorn Rancher. This is another card that goes infinite with Staff of Domination. It's a 5 mana 2/5 with Vigilance. Add an amount of green mana equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So Omnath is always going to be huge. And you can sacrifice Bighorn Rancher and you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among other creatures you control. So if you have this and Omnath out and somebody's going to wipe the board and Omnath is a 50/50, you just respond to it and you sacrifice this and you're going to gain life. You're going to gain 50 life. So it has a dual purpose if something's going to be removed. So there you go. Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger. This is going to double the mana that your lands produce, and it's going to keep your opponent's lands tapped down while he's out, if they tap those lands while he's out. So doubling your mana and slowing your opponents down. Doubling your mana is extremely good just because you want to bank it. Slowing your opponents down is just the cherry on top. Gauntlet of Power. When it comes in, you choose a color. You're going to choose green. Omnath, all your green creatures are going to get +1/+1 because of that. And all of your opponent's green creatures are also going to get +1/+1. Whenever a basic land is tapped for the mana of the chosen color, its controller adds 1 mana of that color to his or her mana pool. So the thing is, this does work for your opponents as well, but you're going to be getting much more advantage out of it compared to your opponents. Nissa, Who Shakes the World. It's a Planeswalker, 5 mana Planeswalker with 5 loyalty. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. It's going to double up the mana produced by your forests, which is the biggest reason that it's in here. But if you do want to +1 it, you can put 3/1/1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. Untap it, it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste that's still a land. So you can start turning your lands into creatures if you need to with the +1. Or you can do a -8. You get an envelope with lands you control have indestructible, which is good, especially if you're turning your lands into creatures. Search your library for any number of forest cards, then put them onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle. So if you ult it, all of your lands are going to have indestructible, and you're going to put every single land in your library onto the battlefield, which is really good, but the biggest reason it's in here is to double up your green mana. Next, Bloom Ancient. If you would tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So tripling your mana is never a bad thing, especially in a deck like this. Extraplanar Lens, it has imprint, and so basically you'll play this out, you'll imprint one of your basic lands under it, and now you're going to double up all your mana. But this also works for your opponents. That's why with Extraplanar Lens, if you're going to be in a monocolored deck and playing Extraplanar Lens, I suggest that you run snow-covered basics, because in this case, if you have snow-covered forests instead of regular forests, chances are your opponents are not going to be playing snow-covered forests, but you are. So whenever you exile with Extraplanar Lens, it's a way that you can double up your mana without also giving the benefits to your opponents. Infernal Bloom, whenever a forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds green to his or her mana pool. This works for you, but it also works for your opponents. But again, it doubles your mana, and you're going to get more value out of it than they are. Zindar Resurgence. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land can produce. So double up your mana. Again, another enchantment that doubles up your mana. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. There's not a lot of creatures in this deck, but that could be okay here or there, because there are a few creatures in here. So if you happen to have this out first and you draw into some creatures and you cast them, you're not putting yourself in a bad situation because you're going to be drawing a few cards off of it. Cage Sun. Cage Sun does the same thing as Gauntlet of Power, but it only does it for you. So as it enters the battlefield, you choose a color. Creatures you control the chosen color get +1/+1. Whenever a land's ability adds one or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add one additional mana of that color to your mana pool. So double up any of your lands that produce green. Mana Reflection. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces twice as much of that mana instead. This is another enchantment that doubles up your mana, but this one actually does not help your opponents. Next we have Doubling Cube, which is a 2-mana artifact that you can pay 3 and tap and double the amount of each type of mana in your mana pool. So you pay 3 and you double the mana that you've got. And with Omnath, that's going to be really good, because if you're trying to win with Helix Pinnacle, that magic number is 100. You have to pay 100 mana into Helix Pinnacle, and you can do this over time or things like that if you really need to. Like, you can do this over a couple of turns, but I think the best way to do it is wait until you have the mana banked and then cast Helix Pinnacle and pay all 100 mana into it at one time. And if you do that, you know, like say you have, just to make this example really easy, 101 mana in your mana pool. On your turn, you cast Helix Pinnacle and you pass turn. You're telling your opponents, hey, you remove this, and it has Shroud, so you either mass board wipe enchantments before my next turn, or I win. So it only gives them one turn to respond to the Helix Pinnacle, rather than trying to do it over time. So Doubling Cube makes making that exact play a whole lot easier. Seedborn Muse, you untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So whenever you have lands that are tapping for 6 or 7 or more mana apiece because of all your things that double up your mana, having Seedborn Muse to bank mana on every single player's turn is really, really good. Wilderness Reclamation. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control, giving you the opportunity to tap all of your lands again to bank that mana over time, which is exactly what you want to be doing. So now we get into the cards that give this its namesake. It's Omnath Turbo Fog. And so far we've seen things that double our mana, a few things that give Omnath some sort of evasion, a little bit of card draw, things like that, but mostly just a lot of ramp and whatnot. This is where it gets its name. The rest of the deck are fog effects, meaning you're preventing combat damage, which is what you want to be doing. So the fogs I tried to put in this deck are ones that give you additional benefits or that have no downside to them at all. So there are some fogs out there that say, like, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn except by elves. Those are things that I tried to avoid because, at least in my play group, elf is a really, really common creature type. It's really popular. And there's lots of fog effects out there that have exceptions. I don't want exceptions. I just want to outright be blocking all combat damage, period. And then I went a step further and I try to find ones with additional benefits. So basically, what you want to be doing with this deck most of the time is you want to ramp out like crazy, start banking a bunch of mana, and say, at that point, you can kind of control the table. You can be like, hey, I am perfectly fine with all of you swinging at each other. But the second anybody tries to swing at me, I'm going to prevent all combat damage. Like, you're not going to touch me in my life total. You're not going to touch anything that I've got, because I'm going to prevent that from happening. So you want to just, that's all this does, is you sit here and you protect yourself from any sort of combat damage over and over and over again. And you're saying, hey, you're never touching me, but I'm going to touch you and y'all can touch each other. And I'm going to play Helix Pinnacle and I'm going to continue to protect myself while I try to win with this card. And if you happen to stop Helix Pinnacle, I'm just going to give Omnath evasion, and then I'm going to hit you. And that's how I'm going to win. Which, bringing up Helix Pinnacle one last time, if you have the 100 mana and you play it on your turn, do not pay the 100 mana into it until your opponent's instep right before you. Because if you play it on your turn and then pay all 100 mana into it and you make Omnath small, somebody can play a board wipe, and then not only did you, like an artifact or enchantment board wipe, and then not only do you lose the Helix Pinnacle, you also lose all the mana. Whereas if you wait until your opponent's instep before you, unless they have some way to give something flash, I don't think there's an instant speed destroy all enchantments effect, so you pay it into it at their instep before you, and then you win on your upkeep. But anyway, Turbo Fog. So every card I'm about to cover prevents all combat damage. So I'm only going to cover any extra effects as to why they would be in here. So we have Winds of Calcisma. It has Ferocious if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Instead, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control. So the reason this is in here is somebody swings at you, you can prevent the damage, block with Omnath, but he'll have more than 4 power, so you can still destroy whatever you blocked. Binding Fog. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to creatures this turn. Creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. It's a fog that can also be used to protect Omnath from single target removal. You look upon the Tarrasque. You can either choose one, run and hide, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you and creatures you control this turn, or gather your courage. Target creature gets +5/+5 and gains indestructible until end of turn. All creatures your opponents control able to block this creature this turn do so. So this can be used to bust somebody's board up and give Omnath indestructible, or to fog. Really versatile card. It covers a lot of bases. Commencement of Festivities. It just prevents all combat damage. Dawnstrider is a creature for 2 mana, and you can pay a green and tap it, discard a card from your hand, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It's reusable. That's why it's in here. Pause for Reflection. It has Convoke, and it just prevents all combat damage. Moment's Peace prevents all combat damage, but it has flashbacks, allowing you to cast it a second time. Revealing Wind. It prevents all combat damage if your opponents happen to have any. It says, you may look at each face-down creature that's attacking or blocking. So if somebody's playing Manifest Dread, whatever, they have face-down creatures that are attacking or blocking, you get to see what they are. Terrifying Presence. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, other than target creature this turn. So you choose Omnath as the target creature, nothing else deals combat damage, but Omnath does. Lull. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, but it has Cycling for 2, so you can cycle it out of your hand, draw a card if that's something you need to do. Druid's Deliverance. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn, and Populate. I actually don't know if I have anything that produces tokens in here at all, so the Populate may be completely useless, but it's still a 2 mana fog effect, which is kind of the standard mana cost for fogs. And if you just so happen to end up with a token, say somebody plays Beast Within on your thing or something like that, or you end up with a token somehow, well, then you can have another one. Defend the Hearth. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to players this turn. Inspire All. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, except combat damage that would be dealt by enchanted creatures or enchantment creatures, and you scry 2. So if somebody has an enchanted creature or an enchantment creature, it doesn't stop those creatures, which is a little bit of a downside, but not enough of a downside to not run it. But you also get to scry 2, giving you a little bit of card selection, which is definitely necessary in this deck. Haze of Pollen. It prevents all combat damage, and you can cycle it for 3 if need be. Root Snare. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Isochron Scepter. This is something me and my friends were talking about at first. Most of these fog effects have a 2 mana cost or less, meaning you can imprint them with Isochron Scepter, and it gives you a reusable fog. And then if you have this and Seedborn Muse out as well, this means you can fog on every single player's turn. Obscuring Haze. If you control your commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost, so it's a fog you can cast for free. Next we have Blunt the Assault. You gain 1 life for each creature on the battlefield, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. This is a way that it gives you an extra benefit that if there's a humongous board out there and you cast this, you're going to prevent all the damage, but you're also going to gain a ton of life. Constant Miss. It has buyback, sacrifice a land. So you can cast this and sacrifice a land to buy it back and reuse it over and over again. Tangle, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Each attacking creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So if somebody swings a whole bunch of creatures and you cast this, you can say, hey, you're not going to attack next turn either. Clinging Mist, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. If you have 5 or less life, tap all attacking creatures. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Ideally, you're probably almost never going to have 5 or less life when you cast this, but it's a bonus if you just so happen to be in that situation. Jahir's Respite. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of creatures attacking you. Put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. So if somebody swings, 10 elves at you, and you cast this, you're going to go search your library for 10 lands, for 10 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and still have the fog effect too. Respite, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. You gain 1 life for each attacking creature. Rog Genesis, you put X 1/1 or 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures attacking you. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. So if somebody's swinging a bunch of 2/2 drakes at you, for instance, you can say, I'm going to prevent that damage. I'm going to make a bunch of 1/2 blockers, and now I've got a bunch of 1/2s, and you dealt no damage. The OG, the whole thing that this is named off of, Fog, 1 mana, prevent all combat damage would be dealt this turn. And finally, Blessed Respite, 2 mana, target player shuffles his or her graveyard into their library. I said his or her, it's there, whatever. Prevent all combat damage would be dealt this turn. So this is in here because it allows you to shuffle your entire graveyard back into your library, meaning you have that little bit of sustain, especially since you're going to be casting a bunch of fogs. Well, you can shuffle them all back in and do all of this again. Extremely good card in this deck, allowing you to reuse your resources and keep you in the game, especially if somebody's trying to beat you with something like Mill. So, very fun. So with that being said, this is Omnath Turbo Fog. It's a super casual deck, super, super fun. My friends were really excited about it. I hope y'all are really excited about it. So, it's a little bit different. It's not the normal kind of Omnath Locus of Mana deck. So if you pull this out and people don't know what it is, they're in for a pleasant surprise. So with that being said, I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time.